Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sunrise Daily. I am Chamberlain Uso.
Good morning from Abuja. I don't know why I always like to add the location. But good morning, I'm Maokwe Yusuf.
And reporting from Lagos. Good morning. I am Bukola Samuel Wemimo. Welcome to Sunrise Daily on Channels Television.
Today is October 18, 2 days away from October 20. I'm Ayo Makene. Good morning and welcome.
Well, if you talk about October 18, I mean, yesterday clearly is 17, but February 14, October 17, two significant days. I mean, I don't know, it appears as though it's mixed feelings because when you listen to what some of the students were saying, while our cameras did go to several universities across the country in the light of ASUU's going back to school, sometimes you just wonder because yes, the students are looking forward to it. Some lecturers equally looking forward to it. But you have other lecturers who feel, look, we're not happy about what's going on. We were twisted into some of these things. We're waiting to see what the government will then do such that they will be seen to have fulfilled their own end of the bargain so everyone can be happy teaching because you just wonder. But at the moment, it just appears as though even the students themselves are not exactly sure whether or not the normal service in schools will be on. But yes, of course, it is indeed very heartwarming to see that at least some activities going on. But the thing is, even though, yes, we'll keep tabs on that and hope that they resume full teaching in the schools. But it just appears as though many are waiting to see how will this play out in the next couple of weeks? Because it's not the kind of feeling people want, though, I reckon.
Initially, I was wondering what's all this reference to dates. I mean, what is significant about October 20? Is it your birthday, Ayo? But then, you know, when Chamberlain said yesterday was October 17, I began to have an idea and then mentioned February 14. Well, for a number of students this year, rather than remember February 14 for what they normally would know it for, which is Valentine's Day, and they're usually quite busy on that day. I mean, I have been a student once. Yeah. I know what Lagos looks like on February 14. You can't go nowhere. I mean, the traffic is something else. But that is not what it was known for this year. It was the day when a strike was announced. The university lecturers downed tools on that beautiful day. And, you know, for many months after that, students were at home, you know, facing a strike situation from their lecturers. Not because the lecturers were unhappy to teach the students, it was because they were not happy about the conditions which they have been making reference to for a long time. But somehow, this time around, the matter got to court. There have been many attempts to try and resolve it, both through the back door, through the front door, through outright, would I say intimidation, you know, I don't want to say bully, but that is also coming to my mind as well. Negotiations, etc., until the matter eventually got to court. And the latest we heard from the court was that the Court of Appeal asked ASUU to go back to school while you're still negotiating. And that's what the lecturers have done. We heard the ASUU president say that, look, we will not have transport fare. Our members might not have transport fare to go back to school. And that would also have, you know, some other impact because you have to be very honest. Even though a lot of people might just say, come on, a lot of lecturers live on campus. But the truth of the matter is it also has other significant implications. I mean, as to whether or not you have disgruntled lecturers back in classrooms and whether they're going to be visiting some of that anger or some of their dissatisfaction on the students whom they're supposed to be teaching. I mean, there is nothing like members of staff who are motivated to do the job which they ordinarily love to do. I don't think people forced or coerced people into lecturing. It's something that comes from a place of passion. And if you do not have it, you don't have it. I mean, I got as far as a master's degree, and if you ask me to go and do a PhD, I'll tell you, look, I'm not ready for a heart attack, right? So there are lots of people who know that to be an intellectual is a lot of work, is a lot of discipline. And so, you know, you want to ensure that the people who are in that field are well motivated to do that which we have entrusted in their care, to look after members of the future generation. I know that there are still some negotiations going on, especially with the intervention of the Speaker of the House of Representatives. We look forward to that yielding fruit this time around, and hoping that, you know, whilst the union have shown themselves to be a law-abiding organization, they are back on campus. We hope that, you know, other matters to help to fully motivate them to ensure that we get the maximum benefits from their return to work will eventually come through. Ayo and Bukola.
Well, the first question that I want to ask, is this the last strike we're going to have? I would want it to be the last. So when ASUU says our issues have not been resolved, and those issues are still outstanding, as you said, Mark, conversations are still ongoing here and there. Those conversations started, this particular one started in 2001. How many years ago now? About 22, about 20, 21 years now. Yeah. So that means the issues have not been resolved for 2 decades, and we're still talking about them. The child that was born when the agreement, this conversation started, is a university student today. I mean, that should disturb us enough. And those issues are yet unresolved. Recall not too long ago when the Minister of Labor and Employment said most graduates are not employable. The question you want to ask is, whose fault? Is it the fault of the students or the fault of the system that's not producing the kind of graduates that we need? What is the function of the university system? What is the function that ASUU, lecturers, are supposed to undertake for the nation? I don't know if those questions have been answered. I don't even know if those questions have been considered at all. So, I mean, I really don't have much to say on this because now students are back to school. Chamberlain, you've said this quite often, that the lectures, the things, the learnings, and this is something that is in public knowledge, the learnings that people will have today in 1-2 years, it's obsolete, especially for medical students. So we spent so many years, so many months trying to solve a problem, and we're still going around it. Will this be the last strike? I heard the president of ASUU say, we hope that the next strike, if any, would not last beyond 2 weeks. We also heard the Speaker of the House saying, look, we shouldn't be having such strikes. A clergyman, Okoti, also said, look, let us find a permanent solution to incessant ASUU strikes. There is a reason for all of that. Students can't even plan their lives because they don't know whether that ASUU is going to go on strike or not. So, have the issues been resolved? Will the issues be resolved?
Well, Ayo, to answer your question, I'm not optimistic, and not because I'm a pessimist, you know, but because of the facts on ground, except there's a miracle. If you went by the outcome of the meetings, even that which, provided, some silver lining in the sky, and that was the one brokered by the Speaker of the House of Representatives, after which the President of ASUU came out to say, for the first time, there's light at the end of the tunnel. But, note that the strike was not called off immediately after that. And when the strike was, seemed like it was going to be called off after the Court of Appeal judgment ordering that ASUU returns to work, which was the proviso that if it returned to work, it will hear their appeal. That was when it seemed like the strike was going to be called off. And that's what gives us an insight into why the strike was called off. Recall, if you watched Channels News at 10 yesterday, the president of ASUU in Unilag, Mr. Asher, was saying that the strike was called off to honor the court judgment. So it was a confirmation that indeed it was to honor the court judgment. When the Speaker of the House of Representatives came out of the meeting with Mr. President, he said, Mr. President, has looked at the white paper and, there's some optimism. And he said, Mr. President said, give us a few days. It's been more than a week since that meeting. What's happening? And, you know, ASUU has been... ASUU president has said very little about, you know, the terms of the agreement, understandably. You know, you don't want to anything to negatively impact on the negotiations. But then again, despite all the meetings, nothing concrete has come out. And, you know, just to reiterate what Ayo has said, this is a negotiation. This is something that has gone on for more than 2 decades. Why have we not been able to sufficiently come to an agreement? You know, why have governments not honored ASUU's agreement? It is, you know, because of a lack of commitment, the little premium placed on education. You know, the students are resuming to grumpy lecturers, and who knows, there just might be another strike in a matter of days. When will this be resolved? That's a question that government must answer because it entered into this agreement. Chamberlain.
Well, yes, rightly so. Many will be looking to see how the authorities play their cards next, and we'll watch and see. All right, let's move on to the dailies. We'll start with Vanguard newspaper today. Quite a number of headlines here. But look at the lead one. LP, as Labour Party, PDP, tackle Buhari over claims of meeting yearnings of Nigerians. As a big lead on the front page of Vanguard newspaper here today. The first of the rider reads, "We've met yearnings, aspirations of Nigerians." Buhari-led APC administration, total disaster. LP, PDP. As Osinbajo warns against blanket ban on imports. Opposition must be carried along in governance. This is Uhuru Kenyatta, former Kenyan president. And it's something really that African countries have got to find a way, you know, to incorporate this in giving a kind of democracy that the way it's almost like a zero-sum game. If it's not a zero-sum game, I mean, winner takes all. You will always have a lot of all those agitations back and forth. But then beneath that story, floods, panic as corpses float in Bayelsa Delta cemeteries. That will raise a lot of concern for anyone. Then you see the image on the front page there, houses underwater. This should be a national emergency. I don't know why anyone shouldn't focus on this one. And then don't forget, shutdown on broadcast stations in Zamfara, threat to democracy. That is described to editors, and rightly so. There you go. That is Vanguard here today.
It's interesting that even the regulator, the NBC, has also written a very strong statement in that regard. So if the regulator already has strong words, I mean, it's no surprise that, you know, Bond Broadcasters Organization of Nigeria and also editors, perhaps as the Nigeria Guild of Editors, also have similarly maybe even stronger words for the government in Zamfara State.
The government cannot afford to show itself this way. It certainly leaves a lot to be desired.
It certainly does, Chamberlain. Look at this from the front page of leadership newspapers. 2023 presidency, Atiku, Tinubu, Obi begin real battle for northern votes. APC, Labour Party flag bearers lay agenda before Arawa committee. I'll ensure indivisible Nigeria. That's according to Tinubu. Obi promises to unlock Nigeria's greatness, stem corruption. Atiku pledges to reposition manufacturing sector, tackle terrorism. NNPP intervenes in Southwest crisis. So the story is on page 4 of the paper. You also have a number of other stories there. PDP crisis, Wike faults BOT's resolution on ASUU. 2 killed, others injured as gunmen attack Kogi Church. That's a church in Kogi State. It's not like Kogi State has a church. There are a number of churches there. But page 14 is where you'll find the details. Gbajabiamila meets foreign airlines over trapped funds. Looks like he's playing the the role of the new negotiator in a number of dicey situations. Page 28 will fill you in as to whether or not there's been any headway in that regard. But you also see this disturbing security story. 3 Oyo farmers pay 100 million naira ransom to regain freedom. That's a disturbing one. Let's leave it there for leadership newspapers.
That really is a disturbing one, Mawpe. This Nigerian newspaper is next, and on its front page, of course, as the previous paper indicated. 2023, Tinubu, Atiku, Obi take battle to Kaduna. Is it a battle, really? Well, the writers say, woo northern leaders, electorate amid allegations of sponsored violence by parties. Find the details of that on pages 4 and 16 of the paper this morning. Right under that picture of displaced people of Okutuku being ferried to their destination in Yenagoa yesterday. Can you imagine that? U.S. envoy urges Nigeria to tread cautiously on Kano. I'll prostrate before Buhari for IPOB leaders' release. Let's subscribe to Ezife. Find the details on page 12. Of course, that's what you have on the front page of This Nigeria Today.
And from that, let's turn our attention to the Nigerian News Director, and it leads also with a story on the economy. This is it. Nigerians groan as inflation hits 20.77%, unemployment rate 33%. Let's take a look at the riders. Experts blame disruption on food supply, currency depreciation, others. CBN financing of fiscal deficit disturbing. That's attributed to experts, and of course there's been a lot of talk about that. And lastly, from the riders, FG should review import policy on food, adopt flexible foreign exchange policy. That's attributed to economist Muda Yusuf, and that's a page 3 read from the Nigerian News Director. This new headline, inflation rate, is sure to elicit a lot of talk much later on in the week. And from there, let's go above the nameplate to do a check on this one. Insecurity, bad economy. Presidential candidates beg voters with solutions. We heard a lot about that, especially from Kaduna State yesterday. And even with, one very bold one from the APC candidate asking the PDP candidate to step down for him. That sounded interesting. Lastly, let's take a look at this one from the front page of Nigerian News Direct. It's beneath the big picture, and it's captioned this way: Nigeria loses 120 billion naira annually to foreign production of advertising materials. That's attributed to Arkan. I believe that's the advertising agency. Well, let's leave it there for the Nigerian News Direct.
Well, take a look at the Guardian newspaper next. Inflation peaks mildly as flood sounds food crisis alarm bell. I don't think we need any telling on this. Look, again, I stand corrected because sometimes you see certain things, you expect that it's commonplace or common sense, but it's not common.
So the question is, who is thinking about the consequences of the flood? Because even though there are immediate consequences, we know, I mean, I am a lay person, so are you. We're not, well, maybe we're here serving the people in our own way, but we already can project that as a result of what we've seen happen with the floods, that, food prices are going to go up. And we know that inflation has been running away with the wind for some time now.
Yep.
Who within government is responsible for this sort of thinking? And what are they putting in place to ensure that they're able to mitigate the aftershocks of this particular flood? Well, the ministers are in a retreat now.
Okay.
Maybe we should be posing some of those questions to them.
Well, yeah, it's what it should be. As a matter of fact, there's even a little bit more here to drive the point home with the riders. Challenge threatens Nigeria's rice self-sufficiency. Farming communities completely cut off from urban areas expect worse food inflation next year, experts warn.
And the festive season is on its way. It's almost here.
It will always have effect. I mean, which of the dailies was reporting how they're now asking farmers to pay ransom. Farmers.
When you do that, you know you're playing with hunger.
Boy, just can't deal. That's the Guardian today.
Well, let's take a look at New Telegraph for you. They are also focusing largely on the 2023 elections, and they say this 2023, Tinubu Obi sell selves to northern elders, leaders. Our founding fathers will cringe at those using tribe to campaign. That's from Tinubu. Promises to champion indivisible, prosperous nation. And you also see this, the wealth of Nigeria is in the north, says Obi, pledges transformative leadership. Details are on pages 5 and 28 of the paper. September inflation spikes to 20.7%. That's according to the National Bureau of Statistics. Lack of synergy between fiscal monetary policies liable for economic drawbacks. That's attributed to Shibajo. Grant full autonomy to states to boost economic diversification, Autumn urges federal government. Budget. Planned deficit funding with 8.8 trillion naira loan dangerous. Who's speaking? You might want to see the details somewhere on page 17. You also see that Nigeria's interbank deals grow 3.65% to 1.55 trillion naira. And look at this very disturbing one. NLNG declares force majeure over flooding. That is from a company that is very productive and also may perhaps responsible for quite a bit of the profits that we have been seeing declared maybe into the Federation account. It's declaring a force majeure over the floods that have happened. Says all its upstream gas suppliers had done same. It's disturbing indeed. They have a number of other stories, but let's leave it there for New Telegraph.
Daily Independent is next right now, and look at the front page. Attack on Kaduna rally. PDP asks Buhari to call his party men to order to ensure security for free, fair, credible electoral process. Find the details of that on the inside pages. Well, continues on the inside pages. Right under the picture on the front page, you see there, I've met yearnings, aspirations of Nigerians. Buhari boasts. Boasts? Anyway, that's what you have on the front page. Uhuru Kenyatta warns against ignoring opposition in governance. Find the details also on the inside pages. Now look at this one. Politicians, public office holders deserve blame for Nigeria's situation. Guess who's saying that? Amosun. Stories on page 9. That's the Daily Independent this morning.
Okay, from the Daily Independent. There's been a lot of interesting, line of thought from the former governor of Ogun State, but let's leave it there as we look at the Nigerian Tribune this morning, and it also leads with politics, a follow-up to events from Kaduna, and this is how it is captioned. Atiku, Tinubu, Obi push agenda, battle for Ariwa votes in Kaduna. The writers bring a bit more insight, and they go this way. I fought criminal groups to a standstill as Lagos Governor Tinubu speaks at Arewa Consultative Forum. I'll finish rehabilitation of Abuja, Kaduna, Kano Highway. Atiku addresses Mammoth Rally. Will bring Nigeria back to life. That's ascribed to the Labour Party candidate Obi. And lastly, Atiku, Okowa, Saraki condemn thugs' disruption of PDP rally. From Zamfara to Kaduna, this is what we're having, political violence, and we hope that the politicians will rein in on their supporters such that we can have more decorum, during political campaigns. That cannot be said enough. And let's go above the nameplate to see this one. Something appears to be brewing, particularly in the FCT. It's the first, the second of the headlines above the nameplate. COVID-19, contractors protest in Abuja, demand payment of medical supply to FCTA. I wonder when that is from. Is it from 2020 during the lockdown, from 2021, or in recent times when COVID has slowed? We'll keep a tab on this story for you and see how that goes. But that's one is from Abuja. And there's this one, just as interesting, right next to this just read, performance review, Buhari scores self-high. It's a page 6 read, and it's a follow-up to the ministerial review ongoing. This is interesting that, this is the position of the government. I wonder if this came before news about the headline inflation rate or after news about the headline inflation rate, which has brought us to, where we are now. Bakwe was talking about the flood and the impact on food sufficiency and the projected high cost of prices of food, ahead of Christmas. I wonder if the administration is, capturing all of this, taking it into cognizance in decisions that are being made, such that life can be made easier for Nigerians. But this is definitely a huge contradiction with what we have at hand.
As we often say, I guess we wait to see, because they applied for the jobs. Let them do it.
Chamberlain.
I'll take a look at Daily Trust next. At Northern Elders Parley, I'll champion indivisible, prosperous Nigeria. Complete Mambila AKK, ascribed to Tinubu. North, Nigeria's greatest assets. I'll unlock Nigeria's potential, subscribe to Obi. And then you see, Obi detained me in 2013, says El Rufai. But at the bottom strip, petrol scarcity lingers in Abuja as Lokoja gridlock persists. So that is a tough one right there. Well, that is it with a look at some of the dailies here today. We will be back in just a moment, and we'll begin with a review of some of these activities here in just a moment. Join us again.
The third Ministerial Performance Review Retreat follows 2 others held in 2020 and 2021 to better understand achievements, policies, present and future challenges. The former president of Kenya, Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta, and the British High Commissioner to Nigeria, Mrs. Katrina Ling, the president of the Senate as well as Speaker of the House of Representatives, are among the top personalities invited. Reeling what he called high-impact projects and achievements, the president declares that he addressed the yearnings of Nigerians in key sectors.
We have implemented high-impact projects across the length and breadth of the country that meet the yearnings and aspirations of Nigerians. The implementation of a willing buyer, willing seller policy introduced by this administration has opened up opportunities for increased delivery of electricity to underserved homes and industries. We will continue to review and prosecute high-profile corruption cases and ensure speedy completion.
Illuminating the journey so far, the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, puts forward ideas to accelerate economic development.
Our exchange rate management, and this continues to be an issue. The exchange rate of the naira to convertible currencies continues to face significant downward pressures because demand substantially outstrips supply, and that's just the reality. I think that a more market-driven approach will be best. Some price discovery within the context of a managed float.
The president's African counterpart, the former president of Kenya, gave a constructive scrutiny of the shared challenges and their impacts.
There is need for us to rethink the way we do our politics. Rethink because sometimes our parties are not necessarily formed on the basis of policy, but of region. where do I come from? And it is my turn, it is so-and-so's turn, it is so-and-so's turn. We must recognize as a continent that our differences are so small in comparison to the challenges that we face. If an opposition were to take over today, they will still be faced with the same challenges. It is that ability to realize that no individual is greater than his or her country that will allow this continent to succeed.
The participants further underscore areas of expectations for the present administration.
Nigeria must remain on the path of democratic consolidation because democracy matters greatly to the world.
The outcome of this retreat will provide valuable data and context to help inform the decisions we make in Parliament regarding the current budget proposal.
Through the maze of suggestions and solutions, particularly as the nation heads into the 2023 general elections, the underlying word here is sustenance of a lasting vision of development that transcends beyond self-centeredness to inclusivity. From the presidential villa, Gloria Umezuke, Channels Television News.
All right, welcome back. Yes, we'll talk about that, some of the issues raised there, and more as we progress here today on the program. But yes, we did invite the PDP, Labour Party, and the APC. But at the moment, we've not gotten any response yet from the PDP representative, Mr. Debo Olugbagba. But at the moment, we've got Mr. Felix Morka, who is the publicity secretary of the APC here in Abuja studios. My colleagues will introduce Lagos pretty soon. Good morning. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, indeed. But, you know, sitting back and I know you kept tabs on that ministerial retreat, what transpired, the narratives. But the speaker, when he says the data provided there will be useful for them moving forward, more so in Parliament, as it were. But there's also a lot of data out there which runs contrary to what the president appears to have said when he says, look, they have delivered on their promises. And many who are onlookers just wonder, wait a minute, against what context is he saying that? Because when they look at some of the other figures there, some of them fly in the face of what the president has said. But perhaps you understand his perspective when he says they've met the yearnings of Nigerians. How so?
You know, when Mr. President speaks and provides, you know, information, data, analysis, or even a summation or an impression of what he believes his government has achieved, that is the official record. It's the official record that are easily verifiable.
Okay.
Now, of course, citizens, you know, whether the media or individuals or political parties or people who are in the opposition are entitled to, you know, they have a right to conjecture. You can't take that from them. People can, you know, develop information and data to challenge official record. Now, the fact is, if this president says, for example, that the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, which the previous government struggled and never delivered upon, has been built, that is verifiable. I mean, you know, we don't need to quibble about this. That is verifiable. If you go, I'm a Lagosian, as I said, I just did a few minutes ago. If you travel from Lagos to Ibadan today and, you know, relate that with previous travels on that road prior to this government, it was a nightmare. But today is a much better environment to travel. That is a fact. And no one can obfuscate and make it look like this government has not done a thing in that access. Is it the rail infrastructure, for example? So when the president says he's done well, you know, and he was very specific, he named certain sectors where he believes his administration has made an improvement. And by the way, I think we need to make something clear. Governance is a continuum. When you come in 8 years, no one should expect that you are supposed to actually deliver on a lifetime of vision or expectation. That is not the case. It's always relative either to the government before or even relative to the resources available for you to make those improvements. No, that's the standard.
But I think to be fair with people, they only take them up based on what they have promised. They can't take them up on what they didn't promise, because you politicians will always say, no, I never promised I was going to do this. That's clear. Everybody knows that one. So wherein comes this lifetime development scenario.
No. But see, look, no one, I don't think this government, President Buhari, promised that, for example, that every local road in my village was going to be, made to first-class standard. I don't think that was a promise. I mean, if that was a promise, please, remind me, because I was a participant in that process, and I don't recall.
Let me remind you of this one, since you say we should remind you. In 2016, specifically in April, when they had this retreat, NEC retreat, just like this one, the president spoke in that retreat, and it's widely published. It's out there for everybody to see. He was categorical when he says that his administration will generate 10,000 megawatts of distributable power over the next 3 years. That was in 2016. He went on and said, look, in these next 3 years that we have to do this. This is what they was previously promised 20,000. But here he spoke to say, no, we will give you 10,000 megawatts. Today, we all know we don't have.
Where are we, Chamberlain?
We don't have 10,000 megawatts.
We don't have 10,000 megawatts. We have, at the peak, over 5,000 megawatts. That's about 50% of the figure you have just
over how many?
50%, 5,000 megawatts.
Of the peak of when? The question is,
we have
how often do we get to that peak?
That's not the, you see, look, the question is, if you have a power outage right now, you're running a show. There can be a power outage, whether from a generator or from the national grid, this moment, in your studio. That does not mean that you didn't intend to power this building to support this show we're on today. Plans are one thing. Sometimes reality and accomplishment and the enablement to accomplish are separate. My point is that if there's a power failure right now, I don't think there's any Nigerian who's going to be there who's going to be saying, how dare channels, put out the light? Because you're not doing it deliberately. It happened. Look, the point I'm making is this.
Well, channels already knows that, and we have measures in place to ensure that that kind of thing
I agree. But the point
doesn't
I'm
happen.
making,
So
I'm not trying to...
I get your point.
Yes.
The thing I'm trying to say is this. I mean, I'll even say that, at some point we understand that we have, up to 7,000 megawatts. But the question is, on a more frequent basis, on a more general and expectable basis, we know that our capacity hovers somewhere between 3,500 and maybe around 4,000 megawatts. That is what our national grid can comfortably take in terms of distribution. And it's been very difficult to get beyond that. So when you say 5,000, that is, how will I put it now? It's manipulating the figure somewhat.
No, please, madam. I'm not sure that that's even near what I have said, and I really wish to be properly, represented. What I'm saying is that our national grid has potential in excess of 5,000 megawatts. Generation, we are far in excess of 5,000 megawatts. I think everyone knows the promise, generation,
yes,
the distribution.
The promise here, the promise was 10,000 megawatts of distributable power. That's the promise.
That's the point I'm making. We're saying the same thing. I'm saying that even with that specific reference or benchmark of distributable power of 10,000, I'm saying that this government has moved us far from where we were to where we are now. Yes, given all of the fluctuations which have been explained. I mean, look, in the last couple of weeks, we've just been all witnesses to all of the revelations going on in our energy sector, in the oil and gas sector, with citizens who are Nigerians conniving with others who may not be Nigerians.
While the president sits as the Minister of Petroleum Resources?
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
So that is happening under his watch?
Well, yes. Now...
Is that a success?
Hang on. You ask a question, let me answer. my point is, the President of the Federal Republic at no point, promised that in the entire territory of Nigeria, that we will have a crime-free society. A society where people who are devious, who actually, is that even, Chamberlain, please, Chamberlain, when you ask a question, let me answer you.
Yeah,
please,
let me rephrase the question.
Please hang on. No, before you rephrase.
No, you are evading the question because we just read categorically to you what the president promised. And you left that and went to what the president didn't promise. How about responding to what he promised?
No.
Has he met what he promised?
No, Chamberlain,
he's having a retreat. No. They're having a retreat.
Hang on. Promise. A promise is a promise. A promise is a statement of aspiration. It is not a divine covenant, which even God only may be able to deliver. There's a difference between having, a promise, as you've said, of, 10,000 megawatts with good intentions, with committed energy to make that happen. Now, what I'm saying that you must acknowledge, and which I think I expect Nigerians to acknowledge, is that in our country, like in other countries of the world, individuals, entities, businesses, sometimes seek their own self-interest, even when it is inordinate and it's against the national interest.
What does that mean?
Meaning, for instance,
regarding this 10,000 megawatts promise.
Yes, the people who have engaged in acts of sabotage, of piping our gas to where it is needed to sustain that promise.
So,
Chamberlain,
are they more powerful than the federal government?
Chamberlain, you must let me speak and answer your questions.
You've had almost 40,
because
30,
you're interrupting me.
40 minutes to answer.
Chamberlain,
he promised 10,000 megawatts. It's a straightforward answer.
I've answered your question. What do you expect me to say to you?
What's the answer?
Okay.
The answer is this government is diligently seeking to deliver on that promise. And what I'm saying to you is that this government, at the peak of distribution, we have hit, over nearly half of that promise, even when it has not been sustained as we would like, as this president would like. I'm saying that it is not enough to simply beg it. You must look at the circumstances. And I gave you the example of your studio. I'm sure your diesel, your generator right now, your backup generator, is probably filled with diesel. Your national grid is, pumping electricity right now. But at some point, it may be that even when the power goes out for whatever reason, your generator that you trust so much may also not deliver the promise of, backup. All I'm saying is that these things happen and that there are citizens who are doing this. You ask the question whether the president, whether this is happening on his watch. My answer is, unfortunately, yes.
Maybe I should read this part again.
It happens everywhere else.
Part of what he also said was, we must, and we will put things right. In 3 years left for this administration, we have given ourselves the target of 10,000 megawatts distributable power. That was in 2016.
Yes.
And you say they are still trying to do this. The target was in 3 years.
Chamberlain.
It's straightforward.
You see, look, you can be fixated if you choose.
I'm not fixated.
You are being very fixated.
I'm quoting the president.
No, hang on. And I'm trying to say to you that that statement you're reading was not, in any way a divine code. It is a promise to do the best under the circumstances of our country. Right?
Okay. Now, Mr. Maka,
that's normal.
Now, if under the circumstances which you're trying to let us understand, and then there are this retreat, what is wrong with the president or maybe his handler saying, look, we cannot gloss over what we have previously promised? So you speak to this and explain to Nigerians why they've not been able to.
Who is in denial of that?
No, but did the president reference this in this retreat?
No, see, look, he was giving a speech to a retreat. You don't expect that every minute detail of everything he's ever said is supposed to come into the speech. That's I think you.
Let's take a broader issue of security.
Okay.
We know just how where we were in terms of, the security situation in 2015 when the president took over. As a matter of fact, in his inauguration day speech, part of what he said, he ordered the service chiefs at that point to move to Maiduguri because that was the theater of war at the time. But under the, let's say, the 7 years, is now going to the 8th year that he's been on the saddle, whilst that of the Northeast might have been brought under control, the situation in the Northwest has now spiraled out of control. Yes, they're trying to bring it back under control, but nobody saw coming just what we have witnessed in the Northwest of the country, spreading to many parts of the country, north central parts of the country, and also, showing its, its tentacles into the Southwest, Southeast. The Southeast is another kettle of fish. But insecurity is at a place where a lot of Nigerians are afraid to even use this infrastructure, which you're referring to, especially in terms of roads, sometimes rail, as the case might be. We've witnessed that of Kaduna, Abuja-Kaduna rail lines. So for you, when you talk about the president's delivery on the issue of security, how would you say that he's fared?
I would say he's fared, quite well. Again, before the next word, for us to understand that despite or in spite of the very best efforts of this government, of any government anywhere in the world, those who do harm, who want to do harm, will attempt to do harm. We try to do harm. Now, we put them on the record when they actually do harm. If somebody imagines that they would like to do harm to a country or to anybody without actually trying to do harm, without taking that effort and enacting the harm, it won't get on our record. It will just remain in their, in their imagination. But when they get out of that imagination and they actually do harm, then we, grab it as part of our statistic. Yes, this government has, had to contend with an upsurge of harm perpetrated by those who, consciously, deliberately, needlessly, without any justification, try to do us harm. All of us, each one of us, as a people. You rightly noted that in the northeast of Nigeria, prior to this government, we had swaths of our territory that were under the command and control of external forces who are not legitimate, constitutionally authorized governments of that region. But this government has managed, and deliberately, with mobilization of effort and resources, pushed back to reclaim some of those territories that were lost to the control of these external forces under the previous government. Now, it's a struggle. It's a continuing struggle today and might be tomorrow, because the intent to harm us is not one that I can sit here and assume is over as of today. Now, of course, yes, you're right, that we have had, again, an upsurge in the Northwest and elsewhere of, these tendencies to violence, perpetrated sometimes by people who are not even Nigerians, who are people from the outside. ASUU, for example, that simply thinks that we're vulnerable enough to come in here to perpetrate crime and, even earn resources to support their, terror.
Are we supposed to accept? Are the people supposed to accept all of this and settle with it?
No, please, Shamalin.
It's a question, so you answer.
No, we're not. Let me answer you. We're not supposed to accept, and this government is not accepting it. You make it sound like the government is simply sitting by and watching. I mean, you have just remarked about the fact that there's been severe, effort to push back, send these terrorists out of our, community to limit their capacity to actually, do damage in the Northeast. That is the fact. And it's because of the government's own effort to invest heavily in our military, to support our military, to encourage them, and to ensure that we actually take on this menace.
Okay. There's a lot to go reference actually, because even today, I mean, you see the reports. 11 schoolgirls of FGC Benin Yari still in captivity, 488 days on. So there's several references to all of this. So that's what I want to ask: are we supposed to accept some of these things going on?
Nobody. When you ask that, first of all, that's a question you shouldn't be asking. Why would you even suppose or imagine that anyone?
We can ask any question. Any question. Any question under the sun. We can ask it.
No, hang on. You can ask any question you choose. But my point is that I think that there must be some common ground when we have these conversations.
Okay.
And that common ground. Hang on.
We have a guest in Lagos, so let's not take all the time.
That common ground is that.
Don't worry.
We must admit that no one in this country, no citizen, whether the president or the least person in the remotest village, would condone or support or accept the idea that we should be insecure as a people. Nobody accepts that.
All right.
That's my point. There should be common ground.
Let's get to our colleagues in Lagos. Go ahead, guys.
Thank you, Chamberlain. Well, Mr. Dele Farotimi is here as well with us. He's spokesman for Labour Party's presidential campaign. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
Before you respond to all that you have had so far, let's begin with your own assessment of, what your candidate has been saying. One of the challenges many Nigerians would have about any politician making promises is, look, you're making us a promise now, but when you get into the office and you begin to do differently, we can't easily take that job from you anymore. So how do you respond to that? Because, some of the promises that today's president made, that the governors made themselves, when they get into office, things seem to be different. It would seem like they had new information that they got new information that they didn't have while they were making promises.
Well, I think the first thing we have to understand is when a person is devoid of shame, then they cannot be taken at their word. So when they give their word on any subject, you need to wonder or begin to second guess, could they deliver on their words? Would they do what they have promised? Mr. Peter Obi was governor in Anambra State for 8 years. We can only speak in relation to his public record in Anambra State, and it speaks glowingly for him. If it wasn't until when politics came into the air about 3-4 months back and he became a candidate in his own right on the platform of the Labour Party, very few people ever had anything to say but pay glowing tributes to his record of achievement, both in the area of security, particularly because without security, commerce grinds to a halt, and that is what we are seeing all over Nigeria. Anambra State, which was before he came into office, a hotbed of all sorts of criminal activities, was brought under control. Within months of his inauguration as the governor of Anambra State, that state enjoyed good security. That was the beginning. The next thing is that honesty of purpose was brought to bear on governance in Anambra State, and the prioritization of the needs of the people became the watchword. So you found a frugality that was brought into the administration of the state, which meant that monies were prioritized, education received priority attention, and education in Anambra that was already comatose before he came in went up, and Anambra, I believe, became the first in the country. You can't verify that fact. I'm not Peter Obi, I can't really remember, but I know that Anambra had made very good progress in relation to education, in the area of infrastructure, in the area of investment in electricity generation. I believe Anambra had some sort of IPP that allowed them to...
Well, you see, the claims that you are making, both of them, incidentally, all of them are former governors one way or the other, even though I'm not sure whether, Vice President Atiku ever, really governed his state. But Governor, Tinubu was governor in Lagos at about the same time that Mr. Peter Obi was governor in Anambra State. And, you talk about, what existed before. And essentially, I'm saying the APC can make the same claims about their own presidential candidate.
No, the APC is incapable of making that claim. The beauty of the truth is that it makes you eloquent. And when you have to defend lies...
No, I'm talking about the candidates.
No, I'll get there. You say, if the candidates are talking in relation to what they have achieved, these are demonstrable. I live in Lagos. Most of us who are present in this building here can speak as being related to Lagos because they live here. I live less than 30 kilometers away from you, but I had to get up from my bed by 5 o'clock so that I could make this trip. And that was me driving against traffic. Coming to this place, I watched several kilometers of traffic back to back before 6 o'clock in the morning. That is the quality of life the average Lagosian enjoys, encapsulated in his traffic experience. You might speak to 8 years of Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, but I will speak to 23 years of his unbridled hegemony over this state. And what I'll say to you is that, if anything, what we have managed to achieve is a painted sepulchre, and that is when I'm speaking directly to what Tinubu has done with the state he has had control over for the last 23 years. So when you're now speaking about the APC, I have its almost 8 years record in office, because when we are done speaking about the non-existent record and the painted sepulchre that is Lagos, we will now have to speak specifically to the almost 8 years ruinous record of the APC at the federal level. I watched Mr. Morka struggling to defend the indefensible, frankly. Now, when you speak to security, we must understand that the foundation of every state.
Sorry, but before we go to the federal, I mean, you are speaking to the glowing tribute, paying glowing tributes to what Mr. Peter Obi did as governor. If you would, the APC would certainly also respond in the same light, that while Tinubu was governor, these are the things that he also did. He also took care of education. He paid school fees of students. He did this, he did that. So he also, did what
you want to talk about education in Lagos State?
No, I'm just speaking about education. What, I mean, both of them will make the same claims.
No, see, people can make any claim they care. I recall a time when Naira was going to become 1-to-1 with the dollars, just in 2015, when we were building all kinds of pies in the skies. I remember. But the truth caught up with that. Time caught up with it eventually. So people can claim anything they care to claim. What eventually happens is that the truth catches up with every lie. So when a person comes and says, I have built the educational system in Lagos State, I would point out the fact that for every 10 classroom spaces you have in Lagos State, less than 4 belongs to the state, maybe even about 3 belongs to the state. The remaining spaces are private spaces. Those who can even barely afford to feed themselves are being forced to find money to pay school fees for ever less qualitative education. So when you're pointing at that as an achievement, I'll point at it and say, look, let's break it down to the granular. When you're saying you've achieved so much in education, in relative to what cost, how much has been spent, how much has been achieved, how many of those of us who went to public schools in my generation are able to send their children back to public schools now? What is the classroom availability, whether that be at the primary school level or at the secondary school level or even at the university level? These are questions that are easily verifiable.
At the end of the day, it's going to be data. Do you have data to support what you're saying?
Put it this way. When the campaigns begin and we're dealing with issues in its granular form, and we're able to say, these are the number of classrooms available in Lagos State, or in any state for that matter. These are the numbers required. Lagos State alone has millions of children out of school who are meant to be in school, if the spaces were there in the public school sector, they'll probably be in school, but they are not.
Okay.
Again, that
Sorry,
has
Bukola,
to be based on verifiable data.
We need to take a short break, you know, when we return.
We'll take the break, but then again, that has to be based on verifiable data.
So there are various sources, including UNICEF.
Yeah, as you said, I love the word granular. Maybe I'll look it up during this break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Thanks for staying with us. Well, Mr. Adele Farotimi is still with us here. You want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Ayo. Mr. Farotimi, you know, your candidate is interesting. And I watched him with keen interest yesterday when he talked about the wealth of Nigeria being in the north. Just before that, you know, at another fora, he had said that, you know, Niger State is very rich in, you know, arable land and, you know, it's fertile for agriculture. You know, but let's get to the hows. Speaking of which, should he become president, how will that be executed, given the many hurdles that, you know, a Nigerian president has to cross in that regard? And I'm referring to, you know, how the subnationals, as they're currently constituted, are unable to agree on a lot of things. You know, they're unable to agree on how to tackle insecurity, unable to agree on the water resources bill. So when he speaks glowingly about the wealth deposited in certain parts of the country, how will that dream, you know, of a green country be achieved with all of these hurdles?
Thank you. The truth is that we have multitudes of problems in Nigeria, multitudes on multiple levels, but the most tragic of our problems have been a failure of leadership, altruistic leaderships. What we've had over time are people afflicted with myopia who have not necessarily found the capacity to think long-term and find the commonalities that should bind us together. So in pursuit of narrow interests, we've been further divided. What Mr. Peter Obi is looking to do is not achievable in the absence of a jig of several aspects of our current structure. And if you look to what he has said openly, he has talked about state policing. He has talked about multiple levels of policing where you devolve policing powers to the federating units. I am privileged to have seen aspects of the manifesto, and I know that part of what is being done is to ensure that, to a very large extent, the comparative advantages of each part of the country is allowed to come to play with support from the federal government by means of all sorts of interventionist funding where required, but more importantly, first thing first, get a hold of our security situation, which has deteriorated badly, because now you're dealing with multiple threats, and it's not just Boko Haram anymore, because there is no way you're going to be able to do anything green or turn Niger State into the Netherlands of Africa, as he has alluded to on multiple occasions, if we do not find a way to secure the lives and properties of Nigerians.
You talk about interventionist funding. Where will that come from? How will that be raised?
The first thing that has to be done is to cut the cost of governance. Where you have a situation where the bulk of the monies being spent today in the country is going directly to sustaining the apparatus of government and persons in office. By the time you've dealt decisively with cutting the cost of governance, refocusing and reprioritizing what should be important in government. We are not a poor country. We are not poor. What has happened to us is that we frittered money away on things that we shouldn't spend money on. We have multiple agencies that are duplicating what the other are doing. So I think it's more of a function of reprioritizing, providing the right leadership, cutting the cost of governance to then put money in the right places.
How is that going to be done is the question. Every politician, would have said the same thing. How is it going to be done? It's not something the president himself, with all the powers he has, can do with fiat. He has to still consult agencies, Salaries and Wages Commission, Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission, and all of those things. And he can't, with one signature, change all of those things.
I do not expect that to happen. But I do expect that as we proceed in the campaign, you see a more robust policy plan in relation to education, in relation to agriculture. If he's talking about development of green belts, you see deliberate plans also dealing specifically with costing and the sourcing of financing for each and every project. If it's a budget, ordinarily it should also provide a cost. It should also provide the revenue component that will go towards financing that.
There are those who, Mr. Farotimi, there are those who say, look, every president,
yes,
every governor, everyone who comes into office has good intentions. They have amazing plans. But then they have to deal with the civil service system that most of the time hasn't really allowed them to flex the way they would love to do the things that they would want to do the way they want to do it. So, and it's a challenge that the vice president, when they came into office in 2015 or thereabout, began to talk about, So with the encumbrance, if I can use the word, of the civil service, how will your candidate handle that one? Knowing that, as I said, one signature from the president can't just reorder or rejuvenate anything. He still has to deal with civil servants spread across the 36 states of the country.
I'm no specialist in this, but I do recall that there is the Orosaye report that had been gathering dust for years. And everyone who has had occasion to look at our civil service has spoken extensively about the need to look at the Orosaye report as a way to at least find a roadmap to a civil service reform that makes our civil service relevant to our needs.
Are you saying that your candidate is going to look at it and implement it?
I would leave it to the candidate to speak to that. And I'm saying this because I do not know specifically what the intentions are, but I do know that there was a purpose to asking for that report. And the purpose was because we all admitted that there is a problem with the civil service, both in terms of numbers, in terms of remuneration, and in terms of even the structuring.
And just to follow up to that, how's your candidate also going to get past what will possibly be a colored National Assembly in terms of party differences should he win the election in taking all of these decisions?
Fair enough. I would imagine that in spite of party differences, the commonalities of our afflictions should suffice to allow us to find common purpose. So if the president, hopefully, Mr. Peter Obi, should be perhaps the only product of Labour Party, which I know will not be the case, he would, of course, have to work with the members of the House of Representatives and the House and the Senate, regardless of what party they might come from. I know that Anambra is a small, minuscule part of Nigeria, but it is still representative of the Nigerian state to a very large extent. Mr. Peter Obi, I believe, worked without having any Afghan member in the House of Assembly in Anambra State when he was elected. And he managed to find common purposes with them. Even when he was impeached, he came back to the instrumentality of the judiciary, and he came back to work with the same people, and he found common purpose with them because they were ultimately all elected to work for the good of the people of Anambra State. If the same happens in relation to the Nigerian Federation, I would believe that the man in Kankara from Katsina State, who is more interested in ensuring that there is security of life and property in his place, would sign on to any program that Mr. President might care to bring before the Senate that increases the security in his environment.
Historically, Mr. Farotimi, you know I like Bukola's question. You know that that's not always been the case.
Put it this way.
Okay, so perhaps you might want to put it differently in response to this. In the event that it doesn't happen, that, the politicians do what politicians do. They insist on their party position. They do everything they can, as the opposition parties always do, to discredit the incumbent government of the day. Is your candidate, because there are those who have alluded to the possibility, will your candidate be using executive orders to operate?
I know as a fact that my candidate will be working within the law. As long as the actions are going to be within the letters and spirit of the law, I am sure that my candidate will work within the law.
In the event that the National Assembly does not want to quote-unquote cooperate.
Let me put it this way. Unless you're suggesting that the National Assembly would be working against the interest of the Nigerian people, regardless of whether they are all APC members or all PDP members, then there is no argument here. If the persons who have been elected into the National Assembly have been elected to serve the interest of the Nigerian people, and the president who has been elected has equally been elected to serve the interest of the Nigerian people, those who are then seen as working against the interests of the Nigerian people would have to answer to the Nigerian people.
Have you taken into cognizance...
One second, Bukola. Do you think the National Assembly, as currently constituted, is working against the Nigerian people?
Every member of the Nigerian ruling class, as currently constituted, are working against the interests of the Nigerian people.
The National Assembly?
Including the National Assembly.
You think they are working against the Nigerian people?
I'm not saying that I'm thinking, I'm saying as a fact.
Even with the Electoral Act that you have also praised, the PIA?
Talking about, you see, there would always be unintended consequences. If hyenas are gathered feasting on a carcass, and the ravens come around to find something to eat, it wasn't intended for the benefit of the ravens. The ravens are merely beneficiaries.
Let's assume that the National Assembly will not be working against the interests of the Nigerian people. You know, what if, you know, there are genuine ideological differences between the executive and the presidency? For instance, you know, following this, the passage of this 2023 appropriation bill, some National Assembly members have said, look, take out fuel subsidy from the budget, that it's just a scam. So what if there are genuine ideological differences between parliamentarians within, you know, the next government as constituted and your government, should your government win the election?
That is the
How will that be addressed?
That is the beauty of democracy. When there are policy differences, and you might very well find that someone like me might be one of those who have genuine policy differences with the government that might emerge. I'll be out there on the street if there is a need to protest. If we are dealing with a democracy, we must understand that we will not mirror each other in terms of policy positions. So where there are policy differences, the assumption is that there will be back and forth negotiations so that you can find middle ground, so that you might be able to work for the interest of the people who you have all been elected to serve. It is only when you are now not in a position to find a middle ground that the person who has the overwhelming majority enforces their own will. But we must understand that as long as the differences in question are issues of policies, philosophies, maybe even ideology, I have a lot of policy differences and ideological differences with a lot of people that one is obliged to work with in this season. But it does not change the fact that one is going to lose the capacity to disagree simply because we're on the same side.
Let's quickly return to Abuja. Chamberlain. Okay, while the guys are still getting ready, one of the questions that I would also want to ask you, there is a whole load of young people, you know, behind your candidate. And other parties also say there's a whole lot of young people working among them. The PDP, the APC, the NNPC, the rest of them. Now, the question then would be, in your opinion, going into 2023, what would you be saying to young people? There has been a whole outcry for them. What would you be saying to them? Before you go to that one, respond to the claims of Mr. President about the ministerial retreat, where he says that, look, a lot of things have been done by the party, the APC, to make Nigeria better.
Well, I have had occasion to point out in the past that when you're listening to Mr. President, General Buhari, be careful not to use your own parameters to interpret his words. The man says he has done very well. By his own parameter, Mr. Moka was very kind to say that that's the official record. But it's a pocketbook issue. When you tell me the economy is good, I look at my pocket. When you talk to me about increasing power generation, I check my diesel cost, my energy cost. When you talk to me about improvement in security, I check the level of my heart palpitation when I'm traveling outside any city perimeter. So when Mr. President makes these claims, it is very easy for the average member of the Nigerian society, understanding clearly that there is a dissonance between Mr. President's claim and his own reality. He understands that he shouldn't listen to what Mr. President is saying, but he should look to his own reality. There is a vast gulf between General Buhari's claim and the reality of the Nigerian experience. Our lives have never been more miserable. If anything, whoever is coming after Mr. Buhari, and I hope and pray that it is somebody as visionary as Peter Obi, if it is not, what we have is a major problem on our hand. The country has been damaged beyond repairs. You actually have to reimagine it completely and then begin to rebuild it with the consensus of the people. Without the consensus of the people, it becomes almost impossible to repair the damage. In fact, it's impossible to repair the damage.
Okay.
You have to revision the country, and that dovetails into your first question, which is now the second, the young people. This is essentially a young country. Just as you would have young people behind Mr. Peter Obi, you have young people in the APC, you have them in the PDP, you have them in parties like the AAC as well. So you have multiplicities of parties where youth are involved. But the first thing that I have to say to any youth who is involved in the coming election is, exactly how does the candidacy or the platform serve your purpose? February 14, ASUU went on strike. This is October. He has taken the Court of Appeal to get ASUU to go back. What will happen as a function of that return, we don't know yet.
Okay. Well, we're running out of time, but let's quickly go back to Abuja. Chamberlain.
All right, yes, indeed, Mr. Moka. Well, there are different parameters of this, so I'm just wondering which one, but perhaps we should try corruption. The president is big on corruption. Everybody wants that to be a thing confined to the history books in this country. But if I could just quickly take, maybe you could call it an independent assessment, if you will. There's this 2020 country report on human rights practices released by the U.S. Department of State. And this was published in 2021. In section 4 of that report, which focuses on Nigeria, it was titled Corruption and Lack of Transparency in Government. Now, this report notes, quote, although the law provides criminal penalties for conviction of official corruption, the government did not consistently implement the law, and government employees frequently engaged in corrupt practices with impunity. Massive, widespread, and pervasive corruption affected all levels of government, including the judiciary and security services. What do you think of this?
That's an assessment of the State Department. Now, the State Department reports are, very familiar. I'm a human rights, lawyer, and that's my background, so I have, regards.
So at least you can relate with this.
I can relate with the report. But the point is that this government, more than any government, has, I think, deployed massive energy and resources and invoked our instruments of state to challenge and combat corruption more than any other. Corruption is, or was made, one of the cardinal objectives of this government, and for good reason.
When you say that they have deployed cardinal or massive resources of state to tackle corruption more than any other, can you be more specific as to which areas? No, I can be more specific.
I mean, this government, has, I think, put on trial and actually convicted more people, more erring officials, public, officials
whom it is
who have
pardoned,
engaged in acts of corruption.
Whom it is also pardoned?
Look, we must separate issues. Even those who are pardoned.
But that's a fact.
Hang on. Even those who are pardoned were convicted. A pardon is, a statement that acknowledges, that is built or founded upon a judicial conviction. You can't pardon someone who was not tried, put through a process of trial and conviction. So, that is a separate issue. We can have a conversation about why and what was the rationale for that pardon. But the point I'm making to you is that this government, from 2015, has, ensured that every public officer who was validly accused or suggested to have engaged in acts of corruption were put on trial, and the judicial system was allowed to actually run its course. In some cases, convictions were made. In some cases, people were acquitted. Now, more recently, the former Accountant General of the Federation was suggested to have done things that were wrong, but were put on trial. This president has not, as we have witnessed throughout our more recent history of presidents intervening to block or obstruct the trial of public officers who are engaged in acts of corruption. Now, corruption is something that's been with us, and I'm sorry to say, may actually be with us for some time to come. It is not something that is
efforts of this government notwithstanding.
The efforts of any government notwithstanding. In Japan, people commit suicide when they engage in acts of corruption, and it happens all the time. We read it in the papers every day. In the United States, people still are cited for corruption. The former president of the United States.
Mr. Moka, I do not want to. Look, let us not gloss over this.
We must put these things in context.
Only recently, right? Exactly. Let's put it in context. I mean, let's not even talk about corruption. Maybe perhaps the only thing, and even when the president or the vice president speaks about corruption, what they normally would say is that, grand corruption, which is, corruption sanctioned from official quarters, has largely been reduced. And
it has been reduced.
For a number of people, they will accept that statement. Yes. But if you were to leave the first two main officers in charge, I mean, the president and the vice president, and you were to go down, there'll be varied responses as to what the perception of corruption is. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, you also have, a ministry, for instance, which the president himself superintends, the Ministry of Petroleum. Look at the sort of discoveries that are allegedly just being made, by a company which was contracted. This company was criticized prior to 2015, and I think its contract with the government was not needed anymore. But we're now saying that the government has had to come back almost 7 years after this company was initially contracted, and the kind of discoveries we're making, and people are asking, how is it possible? How is it only possible that it is 7 years after we're just discovering that so much of our crude was being stolen? There are big questions as to ask whether or not the president hasn't inadvertently sanctioned this sort of corruption, which has, made Nigeria witness a sort of grand theft of its crude oil.
We are all, sort of upset and rightly should be outraged by the discoveries that have been revealed, recently, which I think we knew was going on, but maybe we just didn't have, the physical evidence in pictorial form, just like we have now. I don't think that there's anyone who, first of all, the company you talk about was contracted by this government. If the government was comfortable. How can the government be comfortable when we are massively leaking revenue that the government needs to discharge, its commitments to our people? Why wouldn't the government do that?
The revenue leakage, that's the thing that is mind-boggling for me, and maybe that's why I'm struggling to put my thoughts in words. The revenue leakage we're talking about is not something that happened over 3 months. We're talking about years. These pipes which were discovered over a period, were discovered to have stolen crude from our pipelines this was confirmed by the NNPC for years, that ships were coming to the high seas and taking these things, unchecked. And the questions as to what can be bigger in terms of the sanctioning of grand theft, if not something of that magnitude.
No, but you're not suggesting. Look, we can agree. All of us, I am outraged by the discoveries and the revelations that are coming out, in recent period. You have a right to be outraged. Every Nigerian should be outraged. Mr. President is also outraged. The realization that something was wrong was the reason for the effort made to, I think, get people who have local knowledge of the region to assist our security forces to, if you will, to mount this surveillance and to carry out the kind of investigation that has revealed what we're discussing. Now, yes, that may not come as credit because, like you said, this is coming, a few years after the inauguration of this government. That is a legitimate conversation. But you know what? The point I'm making, and I'm not trying to, in any way, I personally, please, before you, look at the pictures. I am not in any way trying to suggest that this was normal. It is wrong that any one citizen or group of citizens or even foreigners will do this. And I wish that this was discovered the way it's been discovered, years before.
All right,
but
Mr.
it
Walker.
wasn't. But here we are. It has been discovered, and I think that also speaks to the commitment of this government
to
actually
we need to anchor at this point.
This problem.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Felix Morka is the Publicity Secretary of the All Progressives Congress. Guys?
Well, thank you, Chamberlain. First, before we go, you want to react to some of the things you've heard?
Some of the things I've heard are mind-boggling. And the one thing I would just like to say is this. General Buhari has fought corruption, and he won. But what he has done is that he has institutionalized impunity. Because it is only in an environment...
He won the
war on corruption.
Okay.
But he has now instituted impunity, and it has become the norm. Because it is only in an environment where impunity reigns that you would have super tankers coming into our IC when we have a navy, and then they are taking crude for years, and there is a 4-kilometer pipeline that is just suddenly being discovered only when security was now contracted to the same person whose contract was cancelled and whose person was declared wanted. And then in the same soap opera of impunity that is being scripted by this administration, we are watching this crude-laden vessel being burnt in an environment that is already a scene of ecological disaster.
What would your candidate do differently?
I would imagine that the first thing anybody needs to do differently is bring leadership into the Nigerian space.
Okay.
That won't cure the problem, but it's a start.
Well, it's a long conversation, and this is one of several that we're going to be having with you, hopefully. Dele Farotimi, spokesman, Labour Party presidential campaign. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much.
We'll take a short break, and we have one more to go. Stay with us.
The 10 villages in Ibariam, an agrarian community close to the Omambala or ASUU rivers in Anambra East local government area, are affected by flood. Residents have suffered huge losses due to the flooding that's still wreaking havoc in the area. But they are assured of help by the member representing Anambra East constituency in the State House of Assembly, who says appropriate interventions have been planned by the state and federal government.
Next year, during this time, if we are planning to prevent such things from happening, we also identify this very area of prominent people of the barrier. Not just this place, just like you can see, we visited Anikwem village and Amedu village. And of course, we are all submerged in water. An event that never occurred before now. It is even worse than the 2012 unprecedented flood disaster that happened in Anambra State.
He tries to lift the spirits of those displaced and taken refuge in homes not heavily affected by flood. At the emergency camp in Umueri, the population is growing daily with limited supply of relief materials. Though the local government councillor praises the efforts of the state government, many things are still lacking.
Those who are bringing, they are trying their best. So we are still pleading with the local government and the NGOs to please come to our rescue. We need more foodstuff, more especially consumable and drugs.
But more critical is the health condition of many in the camp, especially women and children.
If we have an emergency, which the one we had, all we need to do is to move the patient down to General Hospital Umueri, which is the nearby General Hospital around this place. So at that place, we have all the facilities and all the materials to handle that kind of emergency. So that's what we have been doing for them.
Medical and food supports are brought in as the lawmaker hands over a small ambulance to the doctor in charge.
Nobody should pay, and all these drugs they are seeing are certified by NAFDAC. There are ranges of drugs that can take care of hypertension, malaria, any ailment. Infusions are there and injections.
The visiting team also observes the surging crowd of flood-displaced persons in other camps, especially in Aguilera and Onitsha, where food and medical supplies were also given.
All right, welcome back. Not a very good picture, I tell you. Well, yeah, we're joined, as you may have seen there, by His Excellency, Professor Chukwuma Soludo, Governor of Anambra State. Good morning, Your Excellency. Thank you for joining us on the program today. Well, it would have been nice to start on a very good note, having taken the seat, especially many know your last position as CBN Governor, but it's not any easy. Uneasy lies the head, now where's the crown, they say. I know as a couple of days ago, I think it was about 5 local governments that we understand were affected severely by flooding in Anambra State. So what can you tell us? What is the current situation now?
Well, I must say thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Good morning to you all. Well, it's not 5 local governments. It's now 8 local governments, actually. Wow. That have been underwater with hundreds of thousands of people displaced and hundreds of billions of naira worth of assets estimated underwater now, buildings, farmlands, and so on and so forth. The entire food basket of the state, and I would dare to say much that supplies food to much of the country, rice farms and everything. Been submerged, bridges, roads swept away, and so on. And like I said, hundreds of thousands of families displaced. But the people are trying to cope in 8 local governments. Anambra people have risen up to the occasion, the government and the people. Community spirit efforts. Hundreds of thousands of people are now in their neighbors and families, relations, and so on and so forth. Places they've run to. We've tried much of what is going on is rapid response and coping strategies by the state, and but I must say by the state and citizens, public-spirited individuals. Anambra, we have this communal spirit, and so private individuals, foundations, everybody trying to chip in the much they can. The spirit of leaving no one behind. For us, it's also been quite, but empathy, finance, and so on, dealing with their health, their accommodation, their food, their clothing. I mean, just trying to let them survive day-to-day basis. Of course, some people lost their lives in trying to escape with their own boats, as it were. May their souls rest in peace. And but the fundamental thing actually here for us is not so much about the ravage, of this flood. It's made a bad situation worse for us as in Anambra. The environment is Anambra's #1 existential threat. Anambra is the gully erosion capital of Nigeria, with about 30% of our land under threat by gully erosion. We have been desilting and cleaning up drainages everywhere just to let runoff water to be able to get to the river, as it were. But now the water from the river now coming on to overwhelm the, 1/3 of the state, even a little more than 1/3 of the state, as it were. But the question is not even, the question is how we cope now. What are we going to do to these hundreds of thousands of people when the water recedes and they get back to their homes to start life afresh? And what is the nation doing to prepare for the next one? Because we know that it will happen again and again. It has been happening. Cameroon will still open the dam again in the next 1 or 2 years, or next year or thereabout. What is a national plan to deal with the next one? Because it is coming. It doesn't come as an emergency. We know Cameroon wants us, and we know the next one will come. It's whether we're going to build dams, whether we're going to build whatever, or embankments along the banks of these rivers and so on when they upload their stuff. I think as a nation, we need almost like an emergency conversation. So let this not be another one where this will just be swept, thought, and life goes on. Because
what are you hoping to do to get that conversation started? Because right now, your state has been badly hit. You've said that the environment is an existential threat for Anambra, and you've also talked about how 1/3 of your state has been covered by these floods. First, our hearts to the people of Anambra who have been affected by the floods, and perhaps by extension to all Nigerians who are facing displacement and even have lost lives as a result of this. But I'm wondering what the next step is for you now as governor, looking at what is currently happening in your state.
Well, for us, two things. The #1 is that we got to survive first. That's deal with the immediate. For hundreds of thousands of people, it's a matter of life and death. And for us as government, that's the #1 responsibility, is to keep them safe, get them back on their feet, the much that we can within the limited resources of the state. But we are committed to doing any and everything that we could to get the people safe and to get back. We're doing quite a whole lot. In fact, in our manifesto, the environment is the 4th pillar, is the 4th major pillar of our agenda. Having planned livable, sustainable society, among which is dealing with the issues of the erosion control and so on and so forth, and flooding. These are the two major ones that threaten our existence. But beyond the immediate coping strategies and our own long-term agenda as a government in dealing with the environment and the issues of flooding and so on, there is a national conversation that needs to happen. And we're going to take this up, this interview, this discussion we're having now, it's all part of it. And we're going to take this up at various fora where we need to raise this. Because there is a national emergency. We know that this thing is no longer an emergency. We can no longer deal with this perennial flooding as an emergency, as unanticipated event. No, we knew it will happen. We know it will. The next one will come. 1 or 2 years from now, another massive one will come again. And the country must begin to now prepare and ask, what if it happens again? What's our response? And that conversation, I believe, must become a national conversation. In the run-up to next year's election, even as we speak, I expect, and I have said this before on Al Jazeera, I had expected that as we speak, beyond these, what I might call transient temporary palliatives from NEMA, they have come with a few things 2 weeks after the flooding was ravaging. But too little, too late, I must say. I mean, to be frank, too little. I mean, just like a little less than a drop in the ocean, as it were. That I think the National Assembly, the presidency, the National Assembly need, I mean, some kind of a more forceful response, especially in the next 2 weeks or so, or 3, when the flooding recedes, and these hundreds of thousands of people get back to their homes and to meet nothing. You'll have reptiles, you'll have all manner of things swept from the rivers and so on, you know, ravaging their compounds and so on. There will be health emergencies nationwide. I mean, most of the places affected, you would have people having to pick up their lives, agrarian communities that have been completely wiped off. Everything they had,
so
completely wiped off.
What's the plan? I mean, you are already painting a picture and you can already see that you will have some work on your hands. And I know that the areas which you are pointing to, for instance, health, is one of the areas where both federal government and state government have constitutional responsibilities. So what precisely is the plan when I mean, you have at least 2 to 3 weeks now when we're expecting that the flood waters will recede from what you have said. What exactly are you thinking of, at least for the people of Anambra, whilst you're also trying to prod the federal government to come up with a Marshall Plan in that direction?
No. On our own side, like I said, we are working 24/7. I mean, we're not relenting. I mean, whether it is in the area of providing them accommodation, whether it is in the area of providing health facilities, we have health facilities in every camp where we have holding camps, where we have these displaced persons. We have people, facilities, they are feeding and so on and so forth, even power, electricity, water, and so on. These are like the immediate coping strategies that need to be in place. I think we have done, if I may judge as a performance so far in this, I would say so far, so good. And we're also thinking about the next steps. The next steps is in 2-3 weeks, these people will be expected to go back home. The bridges are cut, the roads are washed away. There are communities and local governments now that are completely cut off. The roads leading to those places completely swept off by this ravaging flood. And it's not just washing off, it's just cutting off. Because like I said, the erosion, only erosion is soil is sandy, porous. And so several of the roads washed off. It's going to require massive capital investment, resources that we are grappling to say where we get that from. It will require massive construction works to get people even to be able to drive back to their homes on road. It will require massive investments in trying to get these people back on their feet if we need to provide some basics, even for people to go back and buy some clothes to wear since they ran away, leaving everything to ruin, and so on and so forth. Anambra State is planning, and we are within the limited budget, limited resources at our disposal, about what we try to help these people, even if it's, whatever we can afford, to help them get back to their feet. But that's not enough. It's far, there are financial requirements far in excess of what any state government can do. This must be treated as a national existential emergency.
If I could just follow up on that particular point, Because
Yes.
when I mean, even looking at the images, it's really shocking to a lot of people who are seeing that. But there's this statement that was released by the spokesperson of the president, Mr. Gabasho, who says, while not a national level emergency, the ongoing flooding is an emergency nevertheless. And they went on to say that each of the 3 tiers of government have a sizable budget at its disposal allocated monthly precisely to deal with these state-level natural emergencies, as well as federal agencies dedicated to doing the same. Do you think the government has a true picture of what is going on across the country?
I need to. I would ask him what this thing, this allocation, is for dealing with this kind of ravaging, where you sack population in about 8 local governments at once and destroying hundreds of billions naira worth of assets and livelihood and so on and so forth. And I will bet, and I'll let him let me know what it is that is allocated, ecological thing that comes a few peanuts that can't even fix one little bridge or whatever thing that is swept off. In Anambra's case, for example, that I described as the gully erosion capital of Nigeria, I will bet that if you spend 50% of the entire ecological fund in Anambra State in 1 year, it will still be, I mean, it will be significant, but not the kind of, it will be significant, but probably touching 10, 20% of the problem. Anambra is a national emergency by itself, by the nature of the ecological challenge itself that requires special funding and attention. Because 1/3 of the land of Anambra is under threat. 1/3 of the land of the place is under threat. Villages, communities are falling under. And Loco, for example, get to Nanga. Villages are submerged under erosion gullies every year.
And so, Your Excellency, if you acknowledge Anambra as a national emergency, pardon me if I'm coming there, if you acknowledge Anambra as a national emergency, being the capital of gully erosion in the country, your partnership with NewMap, you know, that's the new World Bank-assisted partnership, has already identified 969 sites, out of which only 15 have been prioritized. What are the mitigation strategies that your government will be putting in place beyond this national conversation? Do you consider it important enough to prioritize it in your budget? I ask this because, you know, state governors have a penchant for, you know, prioritizing other capital projects like roads, like an airport, but will your government consider this important enough to devote significant resources to, reconstructing these erosion sites to mitigate the adverse effects of climate change?
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, Your Excellency.
Hello? Are you hearing me?
Yes, go ahead.
Are you there?
Go ahead.
Hello?
I don't know what it takes to build.
Go ahead.
Are you hearing me?
Yes. Yes, go ahead, sir.
Okay. Yes, I just responded to you a moment ago that the environment, the ecology, the planning, the spending happen to be one of the 5 agenda items on our manifesto, on our programs. Like I said, the environment for us is our existential threat, the #1 existential threat for Anambra. And so, I said it a moment ago, we have our plans, desilting the drainages, we're constructing, tackling this head on. We're actually, there was a new map program which complemented the Air Force, and we have now taken it to the next level, spending quite a fortune on drainages and channelization of water and planning our communities. We're getting onto planning, planning the runoff water where they go. We're actually having a draft legislation now for people to be able to contain runoff water from their respective homes, and how we channel them and make sure that they get to the river and so on and so forth, rather than running off on the streets and causing gully erosion all over the place. So on our own part, we've identified this as our existential problem and a priority, and we're working very, very hard. If you've followed our programming, what we've been doing around our Onitsha area, that's one of the things we started with. The silting of Sakamori at Opoko and going into Onitsha. We've been doing demolitions of buildings that stand on the waterways and so on and so forth, the runoff waterways that are being prevented from getting to the river and thereby causing erosion around the state. You've been following much of this. This is part of our determination to renew the place, to regenerate our cities and get them in a livable, more sustainable path. But, like I said, we will do everything that we have to, and that's our priority number one, because it's existential. But even with all of that, put together the entire budget of the state, the entire budget, and pour this into on environment alone, on just controlling the ecology and this gully stuff with villages being submerged by gully erosion every day. It's a drop. Far beyond, it's a drop out there. So, but we are not relenting. We're not just going to be saying, "Oh, this is bad," and so on. We're not talking about this simply because of this flooding. It's there in my manifesto. Is the environment that we identified as the number one existential threat of the state and the gully erosion capital of the country. Well, so for me, it's about what we do now, coping strategy with this crisis, but more so for the future, a two-part tier, what we are doing, and we will, as a people, as a state, do the maximum.
Okay.
But there is also the third component, which is the nation as a nation, recognizing where you have, because a threat to one is a threat to all.
Rightly so said, Your Excellency. We do thank you very much indeed for your time, and our heart goes out to everyone affected in Anambra, Kogi, Nasarawa, Bayelsa, Rivers, everywhere. And yes, indeed, the country needs to have this conversation, and we will do what we can to ensure that at least we'll contribute to our quota. But we thank you for coming on, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
Well, there you go. Just going through my head is, you can imagine someone who's worked all their life to save up a little, and then flood just comes.
Those
and then
visuals are disturbing, Chamberlain.
Very much so.
Disturbing. But
well, that is the show today. Well, thank you all for watching. We just hope you stay safe out there and do what you can. We'll see you next time. I'm Chamberlain Usal.
Whatever it happens today, just keep your head up. Thank you for watching. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf.
And from here, we urge you to keep the people of those states mentioned in mind. Thank you for watching Sunrise Daily. I am Bukola Samuel Wemimo.
Amaya Makinde. Have a wonderful day.